Welcome back to Speed Reading for Awesome People. This is Lesson 2. In the previous lesson, we learned that when we read, we're simply transmitting thoughts and ideas from someone else's mind into our own. We also learned that reading is a process that can be optimized by learning how to turn those thoughts directly into mental images. Today, we're going to learn why mental images are the key to learning faster and how to create powerful mental images that will help you remember anything that you want. Let's begin. So why are mental images the key to learning faster? Because this is actually how our mind works. Whether we realize it or not, our mind is always creating mental images. Every single day, basically every single moment that we're conscious, there will always be a mental image of some sort in our mind. Whatever image happens to be in our mind at any moment simply depends on what we're paying attention to. For example, think about a cat. Now think about a dog. Now think about a house. Without even trying, in your mind you probably saw a picture of a cat, then a dog, and then a house. Other thoughts can be more complex, so they simply generate more images and can include motion and sounds and feelings and lots more details, so they're more like mental movies. For example, think of your home. Depending on what the word home means to you, you might picture the place where you currently live in, or you might picture a place you've lived in the past. You might also start remembering experiences you had while living there, and you soon have memories replaying in your mind, full of motion, sounds, maybe even smells, and a combination of different feelings. So, as you can see, the more that we ponder any thought, the more images that we see, and these can help us recall even more details from our other senses as well. And no matter how complex, if your mind understands a concept, it will immediately see an image or a series of images. For example, think of the concept of math. You might see numbers or shapes. Now think about the future. The image that comes to your mind will simply depend on what you focus on. You might picture yourself doing something that you love, or you might picture yourself or someone that you love accomplishing something amazing in the near future. Even concepts such as happiness, science, business, they all make images pop up in our mind right away. The reason our mind relies so heavily on images is because information can only enter our mind through one of our senses. And of all our senses, our vision is by far the most efficient and most powerful way of transferring information. Because our visual system extends far deeper than our eyes, our mind uses images as a connector to connect thousands of sensory details from all our body and piece them together into one single image that can be understood in a fraction of a second. That's why we're able to imagine a magnificent castle from a good story, or why we're able to feel around in a dark room and get an idea of the size of a table or a chair, even if we've never seen them before. The easiest way to know whether you truly understand something is by checking to see if an image pops up in your mind when you think about it. For example, what happens when you hear something in a language you don't understand? Or when you read an entire page from a book, but then you have no clue what you just read? If we can't form a mental image of something, it's usually for one of two reasons. One, we didn't have enough information to understand that concept, or two, we weren't paying attention. So, how can we learn to make mental images of information that is new to us, especially when we read? Well, let's take a look at how you've learned everything that you know up to this point in your life. First, you paid attention to it, and second, you connected it to something that you already know. Let's take a closer look. Paying attention to something simply means allowing it to enter our mind. Because at any moment, there are thousands of details entering our mind through all our senses. And our mind is only doing one of two things. It's either paying attention to the new information, or it's busy generating its own multi-sensory recordings based on our thoughts. However, our brain is not very good at doing both things at the same time. So this is why it's important to reduce distractions as much as possible while we're reading or trying to learn new information. So now let's talk about connecting information to something that we already know. Everything in our mind is connected in one way or another. The best way to understand how everything in our mind is connected is a tree. Let's think back to when we were newly born. Our mind was just like a newborn tree, like a small leaf. As we absorbed more details through our senses, we started categorizing things and growing branches of knowledge. For example, as we grew, we learned about mom and dad, brothers and sisters, family. We eventually learned about feelings, how to communicate, language, reading, school. And all this eventually grew into branches very much like on a tree. Anything new that you've learned since then is connected to one or more branches. You had to connect new knowledge to something that you already knew in order to grow this giant tree of knowledge in your mind. The idea of knowledge as a tree was originally presented by Elon Musk, one of the most influential technology entrepreneurs of our day. He's renowned for his ability to quickly learn massive amounts of information and then use it to launch companies such as SpaceX, Tesla, PayPal, and other cool projects. Someone once asked him how he's able to learn so quickly and remember so much. And this is what he said: "It is important to view knowledge as a sort of a semantic tree. Make sure you understand the fundamental principles. For example, the trunk and the big branches before you get into the leaves or the details, or there's nothing for them to hang on to." There's obviously different levels of understanding information, but basically every time that our mind thinks a thought, it's simply making a connection based on everything that we know related to that subject. And that connection usually generates an image of some sort. If we really want to remember something new, we have to connect it to something that we already know. And the better that we're aware of how all this information is organized in our mind, the easier it will be for us to recall it in the future. So how do we make mental images as we read? The secret is that we already make mental images as we read. Because when we understand something, the images appear automatically. Now, we're simply going to consciously pay attention to the types of images that we see so that we can learn how to enhance them. With the way that the English language is structured, we usually see a mental movie with every sentence that we read or that we hear. Because a sentence usually contains a noun and a verb, so there's always a what or a who and some sort of action. So just by paying attention to the images that come to mind, we can immediately strengthen their recall. Because now we're engaging our whole mind to connect and organize all the details in a visual way. This, of course, will make it easier to store and remember at a later date. So if at any moment we can't imagine a movie after reading a sentence, then it's usually because there's a word we don't understand. So we simply have to stop and ask questions. And these can be very simple questions, such as what, who, where, when, why, or how. So once we're able to answer those questions, we'll then be able to form a mental movie with the entire sentence. One more reason to visualize our thoughts is that as your mind is busy making these mental movies, it will be a lot easier to focus and get rid of distracting thoughts. As we move through the course, we'll learn how to enhance these mental images a lot more. But for now, let's go ahead and practice a simple exercise that shows you how your mind pays attention. During the next clip, try to count how many red jelly beans you see. Pay close attention. Alright, did you notice how many red jelly beans appeared during the clip? Now, what would happen if I asked you how many green jelly beans there are? Or how many white ones? Most likely you saw them with your eyes, but because your attention was already occupied with the red jelly beans, you really didn't pay attention to any other color. Want to try it one more time? Now try to count how many green jelly beans you see. Very good. So how many green jelly beans did you count this time? But what if I was to ask you about a different color? What about orange, or black, or white? And this just goes to show that even if we do see something with our eyes, our mind still has to pay attention to it. Otherwise, it will be quickly forgotten. Now, let's practice some simple visualization exercises. When visualizing, you'll notice that you can choose how much detail you see in your mind's eye. For example, close your eyes and visualize your front door. A simple image will come to mind, but the longer you think about it, you can start to see more and more details. For example, is the doorknob on the right-hand side or the left-hand side? What color is your front door? As you continue visualizing your front door, you can start seeing the walls around this front door. For example, what colors are the wall? What texture? Is it inside a bigger building or is it facing the street? Notice how the more you think about it, the clearer this mental picture becomes. And the same is possible for visualizing any sentence. Now, you might be used to simply seeing a quick picture, but by making a habit to add as much detail as possible, you can make your visualization stronger. Let's practice by looking at some example sentences together. The dog played in the water. Pretty simple, right? All the words are very easy, so most likely you will immediately see an image in your mind. The dogs played in the water. As you can see, we only added one letter, but this tiny change is immediately picked up by our mind and it creates an entirely different movie. Now, try to imagine the following sentence with as much detail as possible. The girl ate the cake. What kind of girl do you imagine? Young or old? What does she look like? What kind of cake is she eating? How does she eat it? An effective mental image doesn't have to be the same for every person, but you do have to see it in your mind in order to understand it. Depending on what you're reading, sometimes everything will be described in great detail, but this is not always the case. So that's why creating the habit of seeing as many details as possible in your mind will greatly help increase your attention and retention. As an exercise, we're going to display a sentence for a brief moment, and you will try to imagine as many details about that image. We'll then display a small clip corresponding to that sentence, but try to see how many details you imagined. There's no right or wrong answer. The purpose is just to pay attention to as many details as possible in your mind. The cat played with the string. The dog played with the rope. The dog jumped the rope. The monkey rode the bike. Great job. Now let's take a look at some sentences that you might not be able to fully visualize right away. The sea anemone danced in the water. First, we have to understand what a sea anemone is in order to really visualize it, right? So here's a picture of a sea anemone. Now we can clearly visualize it dancing in the water. The blue tang swam by the sea anemone. So what is a blue tang? It's a type of fish, and here's a picture of it. So now that we understand all the words in the sentence, we can easily visualize a blue tang swimming by the sea anemone. The next sentence, the clownfish is friends with the blue tang. And here's a picture of a clownfish. Notice how once we understand all the words in a sentence, any sentence, no matter how obscure it may sound at first, can be turned into a movie in our mind, or even into a full feature film in real life. To summarize today's lesson, mental visualization is the key to learning faster. Visualizing everything we read is so effective because it engages our entire mind, our focus, our imagination, our memory in truly understanding and connecting new information. The images will pop up automatically as soon as you understand something. All you have to do is pay attention to those images. Those that you really want to remember, see them more vividly by connecting them or comparing them to something that you know. If an image doesn't pop up, all we have to do is define the word or ask questions about it so that we can connect it to something that we know and then see an image in our mind. As we move through the course, you'll train how to do all this faster. But always remember that regardless of the speed at which you read, comprehension is the most important part of reading. So all your conscious focus has to be on turning those thoughts into mental images. Because visualizing is what will make everything that we read so much easier to understand and so much easier to remember. This concludes lesson 2. See you in the next lesson.